So today's date is June 6, 2014.
I'm Alice Windom, a native St. Louisan who has lived outside of St. Louis for many years, both as a child and as an adult, but who's been back in St. Louis for the last 40 years straight. I went to Ghana in 1962 in September. About a year later, Maya Angelou and her son Guy came to Ghana. Maya was only planning to transit Ghana. She had met President William Tubman of Liberia while she was living in Egypt, and he had offered her a job in Liberia. So her original plan was to enroll her son Guy Johnson in the University of Ghana at Legon, and then to continue on to Liberia and take up her job. She was staying with a friend of her husband who was from South Africa, and she was staying with his friend John Makunga, and John was also a friend of mine. A few days after they reached Ghana, a group of us went on a picnic to a nearby town, and Guy went with us. Maya stayed at home. There were two cars of us, and I came back to the apartment in the first car. And after an hour or so, we were getting concerned because the second car in which Guy was riding had not yet returned. Then there was a knock on the door, and when I opened the door, the wife of the South African who owned the car that Guy was riding in was standing there with cuts and blood all over her. And I realized right away that there had to have been an accident. They had allowed Guy, who had only been in the country for a few days and was just a teenager, to drive that car, and he had had a very bad accident. So he, it turned out, had broken both his leg, fortunately, and his neck. And I say it was fortunate that he broke his leg because they did not detect in the initial exam that his neck was broken. And if his leg had not been broken, he would have been up trying to walk around and might have been even more severely injured or killed, because it wasn't until the next day that we found out his neck was broken. That meant Maya was going to stay in Ghana to take care of Guy. She moved into the YWCA where I was living, and we had struck up a friendship from the first meeting. And after the YWCA was going to raise our rent for the second time in a month, I, and another woman named Vicki Garvin from New York, who had been working in Nigeria and had just come to Ghana, decided to find a house. And we did. We located a house in an area of Accra called Asylum Down, where we had the downstairs and a landlord and his family were upstairs. So we had a nice 3-bedroom accommodation and had a lovely life there. We enjoyed ourselves. Friends came over regularly, and Maya and Vicki and I all got to know each other much better. Within a few months, because all of us had 2 or 3 jobs, we had a difficult time making a living. But Vicki was teaching English at the Chinese embassy, and they just loved her and invited her to come to China and teach in the Foreign Language Institute in Shanghai. So she left. Then I got an invitation to come and work at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I had friends working there, and I left. But before that, we had had some good times together, and some important things had happened, including Malcolm X's visit in May of 1964, which was quite outstanding. We formed the Malcolm X Committee and agreed to work with him as an African wing of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which he was forming in the States. On the day he left Ghana after his 1-week visit, I took a photograph of him in a contemplative position with Maya, and that turns out to be the only picture of them that is available today. Back now, everybody has 3 or 4 cameras. There are cameras in the telephone, cameras everywhere. But back then, it was rare for people to have cameras. So you could end up with some unique photographs. When after Malcolm left in May, we left in September. Maya, Julian Mayfield, and his wife, Anna Olivia, and I all went to Cairo, hoping that we were going to meet up with Malcolm there and discuss further what our plans for political work would be. Turned out Malcolm was not in Egypt. So Julian and Anna Olivia, I think they went to Ibiza from there, and I believe Maya went to Europe. I went to Ethiopia. And the third day that I was there, Malcolm walked into my hotel. I told him that we had been looking for him. He had hoped that I would be able to make arrangements for him in Ethiopia the way we had in Ghana, but I had no contacts to get him an appointment with the emperor, and that was one of his disappointments. I stayed in touch with Maya, and the following year, Maya left to go back to the States. She wanted to work with Malcolm in the States. And as you know from reading her biography, she got back right around the time that he was murdered. So she was not able to work with him. I did not see her again until I returned to the States. And then we resumed our friendship. We had been in touch by correspondence periodically. But once I was back in the States after 1973, and had a chance to read the first volume of her autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, I learned a lot about her and was so pleased that she was riding a crest of popularity, which only grew as she continued to write, as her poetry became known by, especially by young African American women who took such motivation and inspiration from her struggle and from her articulation of continued hope and of determination. That has inspired, you wouldn't be able to count the number of people who've been inspired by her work. Black, white, male, and female. She has earned deservedly the admiration and love of countless numbers of people. Maya was a woman who was given many talents and developed many talents. I can't say she developed all of them because she may have had some that I didn't know of. But she was a wonderful singer. She was an actress. She was a dancer. She was a writer. And she did all of these things well. She had studied writing for a long time and had mastered the technique of telling compelling stories. So people who start to read her work, you don't want to stop until you finish her stories. I always encourage people who admire her, but who may not have read most of her writings, to get her books and just read them and learn from them. She was a fantastic cook, and she could put together a good meal in a short time. She was a great friend. When Maya loved you, you knew you were loved and that you had a friend. She would extend herself to people. I met one young lady who told me she was in a store in Chicago, Saks Fifth Avenue, and she saw Maya, and she was just overcome because she had read her work, and she told Maya, you know, I would really love a chance to talk to you. And she said that Maya took her over, asked one of the salespeople to give them seats, and sat down in the store and talked to her and answered questions for her. Now that's extraordinary, but that's the kind of thing that she would do. She was a devoted daughter. I met her mother here in St. Louis in the early 80s when she accompanied Maya when Maya spoke for the Phyllis Wheatley YWCA here in St. Louis. She took care of her mother. She took care of her brother Bailey. Very giving woman. We lost a truly legendary figure, and I hope into the future we'll continue to tell stories about her, because each person who met her had different experiences, and I hope that they will share those with their children and their grandchildren, and share the books. Go ahead and buy the books and share those with the young people in the family. I'm very saddened by her passing. Her strong will kept her going through very painful illness. She was quite ill and fragile in her later years, but she didn't complain, and she kept on making her public appearances, sharing her wisdom with people, and making life better for people. I think those are the comments that I would like to make about her.
Alice, would you make a statement about Maya's relationship with the St. Louis community and any other individuals in particular whom you are aware?
Well, in the St. Louis area, the person who was very close to Maya was Brother Eugene Redmond from East St. Louis, Illinois. He's the poet laureate of East St. Louis, founder of the Eugene B. Redmond Writers Club, and publisher of a literary magazine. He also is a photographer who has published a book of photographs of Maya, and who for, I think, according to last week's St. Louis American, 13 summers has gone to Winston-Salem to stay in Maya's house and write his poetry. That has been his retreat. And so he has numerous stories about Maya, including having taught her classes in California when she became ill many years ago. So he was a good and faithful brother to her. She has a number of people that I just happen to know she knows here in St. Louis from seeing them attend events. Barbara Noble and John Noble. Now, the names are drying up on me, but most of the people that I know here who know her, it's a kind of a casual relationships. Every 5 years, Oprah Winfrey gave wonderful birthday parties for her. And I believe that Eugene Redmond and I were the only two people from St. Louis who went to those parties, and that's how I would gauge the strength of relationships of other people here who knew her. Even though she had some very unfortunate events happen to her in St. Louis, and some bad memories arising from those events, she never gave up on St. Louis. She did not blame St. Louis for the unfortunate things that happened to her here. She spoke at the University of Missouri St. Louis, at Southern Illinois University Edwardsville, at St. Louis University, at Washington University. She spoke at every university in the area. She also was a member of the series that Maryville University sponsors every year. And I was unable to hear her lecture for that series because they would not sell tickets to individual events. You had to buy the whole series. And she was the only person that year that I was interested in hearing. So I missed that. But she was given acclaim and recognition here. And when she spoke at Southern Illinois University, I think in 2009, she left immediately after her speech. But the line of people waiting to buy her books that were being sold by the university lasted for 3 hours. I know because I stood in it for 3 hours. So even though people knew they were not going to get an autograph, they stood in line for 3 hours to buy books. That audience was predominantly a Caucasian audience. Her fans loved her, as I mentioned earlier, regardless of race, creed, or color.
Alice, you've had a chance to read my poem, Maya's Estate, Packing and Moving. What are your first impressions?
Well, my first impression when I read it was, this is a very creative way to think of saying goodbye to somebody whom you admire, who has lived such a rich, full life, and who has accumulated, along with the wisdom and the spiritual profundities, a lot of material items. And something has to happen to those. So I thought the poem was quite catching in the way that you elaborated on some of the material objects she got and where they might find a good second home until she comes back.
Thank you very much. Alice Windom of St. Louis, Missouri, thank you for your comments about the dear poet, friend, and sister, Maya Angelou. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Perfect.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I like talking about her.